let me jump in. I have a very, just self-disclosure, we're going to talk about the Sabbath today. I have a very complicated relationship with the Sabbath. I don't know if any of you feel the same way. Maybe you don't feel like you do, but just let me dive into my complicated relationship with the Sabbath. I grew up going to a First Christian church in the middle of podunk nowhere in central Illinois. That's what we say in the Midwest, podunk nowhere. So we were, yes, Leanne's the only one. So we were going to this First Christian church in a town called Clinton, and the only restaurant in that town that we could go to for lunch was a buffet called Maverick. And so every single lunch, we would leave church and we would go to this huge buffet called Maverick. And I had an older sister that's 4 years older than me, an older brother 2 years older than me, so we were all really close in age, we were really young. So our parents would just kind of like release us, and we would just go get a plate. We knew where the plates were, and we would just scan the place and look at all the food. And every single week, without fail, I would look at every single option, and I would get the same dish every single week. Every week, I would get a plate and fill it with these miniature tacos, these like mini tacos, and then I'd get a bowl of taco sauce and just load it, and that would be my lunch. Every single Sunday, for at least we were at the church for 4 or 5 years. And then we would go home from this buffet when we were all kind of like done and kind of relaxing. We'd drive home about 30 minutes. Inevitably, my dad would fall asleep on a recliner, and my mom would fall asleep on the couch in the living room. And the kids would just kind of like, there would be football on in the background, but nobody ever actually watched the football. It would just be on in the background, and we would just kind of like run around and go crazy. And eventually we moved away from that town and we went to another town that didn't have a Maverick. It was a travesty. And what we found there was a pizza place called Monocle's, and that became our new Sunday ritual. And we did that all the way through high school. So growing up, my Sabbath, my Sunday, always involved food, naps, and football. And some of you are like, I want some of that. I want some of that Sabbath right now. Food, naps, and football. And eventually, when I decided to surrender my life to the leadership of Jesus my freshman year in college, I had to start looking back and reevaluating and rethinking the way I had understood things in the past, the way they were supposed to function. One of the first things that I started reevaluating was the Sabbath. Like, this day should be different now. Like, I'm trying to follow Jesus. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. I'm supposed to give him this day. And so what I did for the first year I was a follower of Jesus is I tried to read a book of the Bible every single Sunday. And I would try to pray for like a couple hours, and I also tried to self-learn the guitar so that I could like worship privately. So because my only grid of like honoring Jesus was Bible, pray, sing songs. This was my grid. So I thought, it's a Sabbath day, it's consecrated to Jesus. What must I do for 24 hours? I must pray and worship and read the Bible. So I would try to read a different book of the Bible every single Sunday and take notes on it. I would try to pray for a couple hours, and then I tried to self-learn the guitar to play. And really, you just have to learn. You just have to learn like 4 chords, and you've got like all of Hillsong. Really, that's if you learn those 4, you should be okay. So that I kind of like. So this is what happened every single Sunday. I would be studying the Bible, and I would inevitably fall asleep. Every Sunday, I could not stay awake. I tried drinking Red Bull. I tried drinking coffee. There was no staying awake for that Bible study. And then I would wake up, and my fingers would only last on the guitar for like 10 minutes, tops, because I didn't have the calluses, so I couldn't even worship the Lord for more than 10 minutes. And then I'd try to pray, but I have like pretty severe ADD, so you like pray like, Lord, I'm with you, and then you think like, I had oranges for lunch, and I wonder where those oranges were from, and were they clean? I wonder if they were pesticide-free. Am I going to be sick? Should I call my professors just to check about tomorrow? And then you kind of come back and you're like, what was I praying again? This was my Sabbath. And for a year, I literally, at the end of Sunday and going into Monday, I felt like I was the worst Christian that like walked this planet. I couldn't even study the Bible right. Couldn't even pray right. Can't even play the guitar like every other 19-year-old guy Christian. I can't even, like, what's going on here? Eventually, I started getting really, really busy at school, and I was a part of an InterVarsity chapter, a campus ministry at the college I was at, and I had this mentor kind of speaking life into me, and he was like, yeah, I really love your commitment level, your zeal, this is excellent, but you could tone it back a little. You could start to chill out a little. And I was getting kind of busy with school. So then he told me, like, the Sabbath isn't about, because my personality is achieve and produce constantly, achieve and produce, achieve and produce. And so this mentor of mine told me, actually, the worst thing you could do on the Sabbath is try to achieve or produce. The worst thing you could do is try to accomplish a goal in reading the Bible or to accomplish like a time slot of prayer. That's the worst thing you could do. You have to like do the opposite of that. You have to like rest and accomplish nothing, spend no energy. So this started the year of my life, my sophomore year, where every single Sunday I would binge on Netflix and Hulu. Because it was the rest and spend no energy Sabbath, right? So this is what I was doing every single Sunday, and you know, I plowed through like so many shows, it was unbelievable. I'm not going to mention all of them here, but you guys probably have seen many of them too. And every single Sunday night and going into Monday, I just felt like worse off than I started. You know this feeling. Come on, guys. You know this. You kind of feel actually more tired, more drained, a little bit sad and disgusted with yourself, and then you have to go to class Monday. Like, how do I do this? So I did this for a year, and then that same mentor was like a year later we were checking back in, like, are you Sabbathing? Like, what's going on? And I was explaining to him. He's like, you're not really Sabbathing. This isn't actually what Sabbath is. And he was kind of trying to help me there. And eventually, I got so busy with school InterVarsity work, my junior year was so insane that I was like, you know what? I actually don't have a day to give because I'm so busy with ministry, school, I had a couple jobs, all this craziness. And that's when I was like, you know what? The Sabbath is this Old Testament thing. Like, why am I trying to kill myself over doing this? So then I gave a year to not Sabbathing at all. No Sabbath. I'm too busy. I got too much to do. I can't give a day. Just running. And at the end of that year, I had a crash and burn experience. I'll tell you about it later. It's one of the most shameful experiences of my ministry life. Look forward to it. And then at the end of that, I came on InterVarsity staff. I was on staff with this ministry, and my area director, my supervisor, sat me down one time, and he said, listen, you've got to start Sabbathing, because I still kind of wasn't, and he was like, you've got to start resting. And I kind of told him my previous experiences. He's like, yeah, that's not really Sabbathing. And he said, look, Sabbath is meant to restore you. You're supposed to be restored by the Sabbath. And people are restored different ways. So somebody might be restored by a certain activity. You might be restored by a different activity. So Sabbath is going to look different for everybody because people are restored different ways. It's just about you getting restored. So I thought, hey, I love working on my house. I love working on the car. I love just working with my hands. And so the Sabbath is going to be this day where I'm restored by working with my hands. Well, that went fine and dandy for 6 to 8 months. And then I read a book by Ruth Haley Barton on spirituality of leadership. And she had this little nugget in that book that said this. Let me just read this to you. Viewing the Sabbath through the lens of your own restoration in order to be able to produce more the next week is to actually sacrifice God on the altar of your own productivity. So I'm like, I can't even be restored now? Like, I can't even be... Because this is what I was doing. It was like I'm not gonna perform as good next week if I don't do this thing on Sunday. So I have to do this thing on Sunday to perform better the following week. You see, that's a problem, right? I'm not trying to honor God at all. I'm just like, I want to be able to perform at the highest ability, and God seems to think this will help me do that, and so I'll just try to do that. I have a complicated relationship with the Sabbath. Do you feel that now? Do you feel a little sense of that? Do you have a complicated relationship with the Sabbath? Maybe a little bit. I think it's important to dive into the particular flaw in the Pharisees' understanding of the Sabbath, because I think the same understanding resides in some of us, maybe many of us, in different ways. And we need to hear this word too. We can't just, this is what, any text that deals with Pharisees or teachers of the law or scribes, don't you dare let your first interaction with that text be the, darn those Pharisees. Jesus is so right. And then you just move on. You always put yourself in the place of the Pharisee. Try to understand, what are they thinking, and am I that way? And do I receive this word too? And I think this word is for many of us. You see, the Sabbath was never meant to just be a day for mini tacos, naps, football, work on your house. It was never even meant to be a day where you just don't work. It's not that simple. That's not the heart of the day. It's actually an outcome of the day. And just for a moment, I'm going to get a little bit heady about the Sabbath and do some Old Testament stuff. The Sabbath is the fourth commandment in the Ten Commandments. And when initially given in Exodus, it is primarily linked to the creation narrative. I'm going to read it for you really quick. Just you don't go there in your Bible. Don't try to pull it up on your phone. Just listen. I'm just going to read this. Exodus 20, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. God rested on the seventh day after creating the whole universe. And you should conspire with his holiness by spending it with him. But later in Deuteronomy, we actually receive more information, a few more angles, a few more dimensions of the Sabbath. You see, in Deuteronomy 15, God institutes Sabbath years. Maybe some of you have heard about this if you took some institute classes or you've done some study in the past on Old Testament survey. In Deuteronomy 15, God institutes Sabbath years. Every seventh year in the people of God, there's a canceling of debts. Like if you've loaned money to anybody, it's totally canceled. And he actually says if the seventh year is coming and you decide not to loan money to somebody because you're harboring in your heart that's going to be canceled in a year, you're actually liable for judgment. So he says in the seventh year there's a total canceling of debts. There's going to be freedom for slaves. Anybody who's like a hired hand at all, they get freedom. And there's a relaxing of the land. Every seventh year you don't actually harvest what the land produces. You just eat what you need. And the rest is just like you do a relax for the land, a reset. And actually, every 7 sabbatical years, so every 49 years, there is the year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee includes what the Sabbath years includes. Debts are canceled, slaves are freed, there's a relaxing of the land, but there's also, every 7th Sabbath year, there's also a redistribution of all wealth, a redistribution of all land, and therefore a redistribution of power itself. So we have to, this is why I bring this up. God institutes Sabbath years every 7th year, and every 7th Sabbath year is the year of Jubilee, and both of those things carry massive social implications to live a just and merciful society. And so if God constantly uses even the concept of Sabbath always in junction with social implications to being and living as a just and merciful society, don't you think that the weekly Sabbath day must also include implications for living as a socially equitable, just, and merciful society under his leadership? And you might think, no, it doesn't say anything like that in Exodus 20. He doesn't say anything about that. It's just rest because he rested in the creation order. Well, listen to the next time that commandment, that same fourth commandment, is written out by Moses in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 5, when Moses is listing out those 10 commandments, he gets to this fourth commandment, and he says, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. This sounds familiar, yeah? This sounds about right. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. That's very similar. Okay. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox or your donkey, or any of your other animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. This is like word for word. It's the same thing. This is the part that's different. Then he says, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. You work for 6 days. You do what you want for 6 days, but on that seventh day you rest, and everybody rests. And then he roots it. He says, so that your male and female servants may rest too, as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day is not just rooted in creation. The Sabbath day is rooted also in Exodus. He's saying, listen, you observe the Sabbath because you remember what life was like under the tyranny of Pharaoh, who minimized your life and your personhood all the way down to only what you could produce and accomplish and create, and you had no days off, no time off. You were an object under his tyranny. Not so anymore, not under my leadership, not in my people. You take a day off so that the workers and the poor and the marginalized among you get a day off too. It always carries social implications when we talk about the Sabbath. But in exile, Sabbath became a critical marker of Jewish identity, right next to food laws and circumcision. These are the three things that are like always coming up in the New Testament about what it meant to be Jewish and the conflicts that they're having with the New Testament church. It's always about the Sabbath, it's about food laws, and it's about circumcision. Because what happened was when they were in exile, when they no longer had the temple, when they no longer had these key markers of what it meant to be Jewish, all they had left were these external practices. Food laws, the things that they abstained from, circumcision, and then they had the Sabbath. They didn't want to work on Sunday. If they had the right, they were going to try to take Sunday off. They weren't going to do anything. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were given the authority to actually police and maintain any threats against these laws, to try to preserve the cultural and ethnic identity of the Jewish people through exile. And those are the Pharisees and the teachers of the law that we find in this text, the ones who had assumed that role of cultural preservation, policing the threats by enforcing both the written law and the Mishnah, the oral law. Now listen, when they went out and they were harvesting in the field, they were breaking laws in the oral law, the Mishnah. So I'm actually going to read you a direct quote from the oral law. I don't know if you've ever read it in your whole life. I just kind of this is a paraphrase because I did take out all the Jewish stuff that's kind of hard to deal with. So these are the 40 minus the 1 things that you cannot do on the Sabbath. You cannot do these things on the Sabbath, and they prevent you from doing work. You cannot engage in these 40 minus the 1 activities on the Sabbath. No sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, sorting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, whitening it, combing it, dyeing it, spinning it, weaving it, making 2 loops, weaving 2 threads, separating 2 threads, tying a knot, untying a knot, sewing 2 stitches, tearing for the purpose of sewing 2 stitches, hunting an animal, slaughtering it, skinning it, salting it, curing its hide, scraping it, cutting it, writing 2 letters, erasing for the purpose of writing 2 letters, building, demolishing, extinguishing a flame, lighting a flame, striking with a hammer, carrying from one domain to another. These are the 40 minus the 1 activities which you cannot engage in on the Sabbath day according to the oral law. So the disciples went in there just totally innocent, like hungry, walked into a field, they just want to eat some stuff, they pick a kernel. As soon as they pick a kernel, they've harvested. They've reaped. Broke a law. As soon as they start spinning that piece of grain to get the kernel out, they're winnowing. And as soon as they eat it, they've prepared a meal. So they walk in innocently trying to eat a meal because they're starving, and they break 3 laws according to the custom. And the disciples, embracing their own poverty by grazing, had to break that many laws just to eat because they were starving. What God intended with the Sabbath to provide relief and mercy for the poor was now being used to oppress them even further. The Pharisees' view of the Sabbath was not simply underdeveloped or inadequate, it was immoral. And this interpretation of the Sabbath is severe. It is a severe interpretation. It is, as Jesus put it, a decision between good and evil, the decision between preserving or destroying life. This is a scandal. And Jesus uses both of these moments, both of these stories, to recapture God's original intention for the Sabbath. I got to be very clear with this. It's actually quite popular to read texts like this and to think Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath, and what he's doing, now that he's the Lord of the Sabbath, is he's changing it. And we obey him, not the way it used to be. That is not what he's doing at all. Jesus is actually recapturing what was lost and what was always the case. He's the Lord of the Sabbath because he is the one who can rightly interpret its core meaning and its application, not anyone else. Not the Pharisees, not the scribes, not the teacher. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. And he answers the Pharisees' accusations in the first story in a way that only Jesus can. I love this. Jesus, in all these interactions, there's like a million ways the Pharisees try to put him in a trap. And there's a million ways he could answer them, and there's one way of those million ways that's the perfect way, and he does it every time. I actually was in a gym, back in Carbondale, I was in a gym one time, and there was a guy that came, this is a very random story, there was a guy that came up, and he was asking me a bunch of questions, and I wasn't really trying to talk, have a conversation, and eventually he told me, I'm a follower of Jesus, do you want to know about Jesus? And I was like, hey dude, I follow Jesus too, we can hang out. And so I started just asking him his story. I was like, hey, tell me about when you started following Jesus. You're so passionate, it feels maybe recent. So he said a year earlier, he was a doctorate in philosophy. And he studied the life of Jesus and saw how he dealt with all of these tense philosophical situations that Jesus was placed in by the Pharisees. And he was convinced that Jesus was God because of the way that he handled philosophy with the Pharisees. I think that's insane. And this is one of those places where if you really think about it, it's stunning. How just on the tip of his feet, he just offers this. They kind of put him in this bind in reference to the Sabbath and the breaking of the law. And Jesus references this story about David in 1 Samuel 21, where before David was ever king, Saul was the king, David was anointed to be the king, and Saul was super jealous and threatened, his power was threatened, and he starts chasing him down to try to kill him. So this is a summary. So David has got all his comrades around, they're running for their lives. They come across this temple, they're starving. They go in, and the high priest is a guy named Ahimelech, and he knows that the only bread I have is this bread of the presence, and only priests can eat this bread, no one else. And these guys are starving, and this is all we have. And he considers the whole righteousness of God. And he decides that it's actually better to serve a basic human need like starvation than to force the observation of the sacred. And the story ends after Jesus kind of puts across this story. And he's sure to say, it wasn't just David that ate the bread, but it was his companions too, just in case you're going to try to argue that David's he's so special and he's anointed. It says also his companions ate it too. And then at the end he says, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath, and the story's over. And you might think there was actually a lot more that happened there and Luke just kind of got his point across, but I actually think the story actually ended there. They had nothing to say. The conversation was over. Because in order for the Pharisees to respond, you understand, they have two options. They either admit that they don't know their own history and they don't know the stories of the scriptures, which would be incredibly shaming and embarrassing. Or they have to admit that they don't apply their own law consistently, but with favoritism. This is the position Jesus put them in. And I think that they actually don't say anything at all. The conversation's over. And we have to go look around for another moment and try to trap him again. God always desires mercy for the destitute over the observance of the sacred. There is work that we may do on the Sabbath, work of necessity, but there is also work that we must do on the Sabbath, works of mercy. To turn away from mercy on the Sabbath is to actually trample on the heart of the day itself. I remember 5 years ago, maybe this exact same time, Jamie and I were just married, 5 or 6 months married, and it was our first Christmas together. And it was after Thanksgiving, and it was a Sunday afternoon, we decided we were going to decorate our apartment. We'll get some Christmas stuff. We didn't have any Christmas stuff because it was our first year married, and so we were like, we got to go get a tree or whatever. And so we thought, like, it's Sunday afternoon, let's go do this. Let's go do some Christmas decorating, get some tree stuff, whatever. So we drive to where a first-year married couple goes, Big Lots. And we just kind of like looking around Big Lots, like, what are we going to get here? And they've got all these deals going on, and I ended up finding, she was trying to find a tree, like a pre-lit tree and all that stuff. The thing that I found that I was stoked about is I found these solar-powered outside lights. Yes? I was like mind blown about this. I didn't even know they existed. Like, because my big thing about, I didn't want to put lights on the outside of the house, partially because of the work involved and partially because of the energy bill, the power bill. I was like, I'm not paying for because our apartment was a duplex and it was down a really long driveway. So literally no one was ever going to see what we put up except us. I mean, then how am I going to spend a bunch of money for that? And then you would think, oh, is a duplex like the guy next to the other apartment? They'll see it. No, there wasn't anybody living in it. So it was literally just us. And I'm like, so we're walking around. I'm like, oh, they have lights you can put on the outside of the house that you don't actually pay to maintain. The sun does it. This is excellent. So I bought 4 boxes of them, of these solar-powered lights. I was so excited. We check out, and we're driving out of Big Lots, and there's this huge traffic jam, and you're just like going really slow. And at the end of this corner where we're about to turn left to go to our apartment, there's this woman, and she's got a couple of kids like sitting on the ground behind her, and she has a cardboard sign, and it just says like, would have no money for Christmas? Would you help me buy presents for my kids? And at the end it's like, God bless you for your time or whatever. And we're sitting in the car. And at this point, we do Tuesday nights we're on the streets, like serving dinner to people. Wednesday nights we're going to the county jail, and Thursday nights we're like hosting people in our house. It's just, it was almost like my Sunday. I want to break. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Like, give me a day, please. And we're driving, and the radio isn't even on. It's totally silent in the car, and it's like we're both thinking the same thing. Like, just don't say anything. Please don't say anything. And we kind of like, and the traffic is so slow. It's horrible. Like, we're just going one car at a time, and we're trying not to make eye contact, and we're like, I was like, I don't know what to do. Because if we get out of the car, we like want to have a conversation. We want to get together. We want to like trade info and all this. And I just so badly wanted to get home to put these lights up. Are they going to work? I was freaking out. I was like, I want to put these up. And we get to the end of it, and she didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And it was kind of like mutual diffusion of responsibility. And we just turned and went home. And I'm not kidding. The rest of that day, I was sick with myself. And the rest of that Christmas season, I was sick with Christmas as an idea. It was almost like I took out on Christmas what I felt about myself. I felt really horrendously guilty. And every single sermon I preached throughout that month of December, I just railed on Christmas. I just hammered Christmas. Like, don't you dare celebrate Christmas. I was just because I felt so sick with myself about doing that. And the reason why that was happening was because it wasn't just that I avoided mercy on the Sabbath because I wanted a day off, but it was because I actually avoided it under the guise of Christmas. I mean, think about the irony, the contradiction of avoiding spending a moment of mercy and love with someone who's in need of it in order to go home and put lights on your house to commemorate the birth and character of Jesus Christ. How does that make any sense? Any sense? I had forgotten that God always desires mercy for the destitute over the observance of the sacred. But the Sabbath doesn't strictly carry social implications. It carries those in a major way. And it's not just strictly rooted in the Exodus. It also carries massive implications for your identity as God's beloved, rooted in the creation narrative. It carries both in harmony. Jesus was pushing people toward what Walter Brueggemann calls a Sabbath of resistance. It's this little 90-page book by Walter Brueggemann that is probably one of my favorite books on the Sabbath. And my favorite part about it is that it's only about 90 pages. So you should definitely go by and read Sabbath of Resistance. As Brueggemann works it out, the first 3 commandments are about exclusive devotion to God. No gods before me, don't craft an idol, don't use the Lord's name in vain. And the last 6 commandments are almost exclusively about our relationship with each other. Don't murder, no adultery, honor your father and mother, don't steal, don't covet, and there's another one I'm not going to mention right now. The hub of these commandments is found in the one commandment that is the longest and the most detailed, the Sabbath. It's here in the place of rest that Israel finds the time to breathe, to disentangle from the world and their own responsibilities, and remember who they really are as God's people. Sabbath is an act of trust-filled resistance to the constant anxiety-fueling demand of the world to produce more, accomplish more, and acquire more, and to identify ourselves by those metrics. That's from Brueggemann. Without a Sabbath, you will constantly be pulled to wrap up your own identity and your self-worth in what you can accomplish and what you can produce, in your reputation, what people say about you, and in the drive of the world's metrics. And those will swallow you. They will swallow you whole, and they will offer you nothing in return. I went 2 years in college without a care in the world for the Sabbath. I told you about that before. And my identity was so wrapped up in my task list that being a peace-filled child of God was a distant concept for me. And it was October of my senior year that I just totally fell apart. I had just changed my major to mathematics, pure mathematics, not even math education. It was just philosophy of mathematics. I think it's the worst degree in human history. And I was a senior in college, and I had just changed my major, and I was trying to finish this math degree in 1 year. So I had to take 4 different 400-level math classes in my fall semester. I actually went back this week to look at my schedule. I had partial differential equations, enumerative combinatorics, advanced theory of calculus, and biological applications of integrated testing. I don't even know what any of that means anymore. I paid hard-earned money for those words, and I don't know what's behind them anymore. I had Bible study on Monday nights in our apartment for InterVarsity. We were serving dinner on Tuesday nights in the streets with our people. We were visiting jail on Wednesday nights because some of our people would wind up there. We had InterVarsity large group on Thursday nights. We would throw house parties in our apartment on Friday nights, and then we had house church on Sunday nights. And I had this really cool girlfriend named Jamie that lived next door, which was a real productivity killer. Always behind. I got really, really overstretched. I was kind of falling apart emotionally. I put so much on my plate I couldn't carry it anymore. And at the same time, I wasn't Sabbathing. I had filled that already. There wasn't any time for that. So I was taking no moment in my life to remember who I was and to commit myself to the leadership and reign of Jesus. I was not in touch with his voice, with his presence. I had no idea what he had to say about me anymore. I was totally losing it. And I had these friends of mine decided they wanted to help me. They were going to help me because everybody could see it. And there was this Friday afternoon, I got back from classes and I needed to start working on 2 or 3 assignments immediately. And I got back from classes and I went down to my room. It was in the basement of our apartment. And my computer was gone, my backpack was gone, my books were gone, and I couldn't work. And I looked at it, and for 5 seconds I thought somebody stole my stuff. I'm stuck. This is a problem. And then after that 5 seconds passed, I knew nobody came down here into the apartment because everybody's upstairs. So somebody's playing a prank on me. And I just started, with every second that passed by that I wasn't working, and because I was prevented to, because somebody took my stuff, I was just getting furious and just boiling more and more. And I came upstairs, and the guys that were in the living room, I was like, tell me right now who has my stuff. I'm not messing around. You know who has my stuff. And they actually didn't. They were like, we have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what's happening. And I was like, you call who has my stuff right now, or we're going to have a real problem. And eventually it went 30 minutes without my stuff. And I was standing on our front porch, and I was just like shaking with anger because I didn't know what to do. I'd already called a bunch of people, like I didn't know what was happening. And I see Jamie peeking out of her kitchen window. And I'm like, what's going on? And she's peeking down the parking lot, and I look down the parking lot, and I was senior year, I was the primary leader of our InterVarsity chapter. And the InterVarsity staff worker comes pulling into the parking lot wearing a hockey mask. And he's in a minivan, and he's got the side door to the minivan wide open. And he comes pulling into this parking lot. And then like out from behind these buildings came 4 guys in all black in these ski masks. And they come out. And immediately in my mind, I know what's happening. My staff worker decided to take my stuff, and they're going to come and kidnap me, and they're going to take me to like do something fun. How sweet of them. And I saw these 4 guys in the hockey in the ski masks, and I knew exactly who all 4 of them were, just by like shape, body build, like the way they were moving. Like I could tell who they were. I knew each one of them. I knew who they were. And they were all actually leaders in the chapter. They were all Bible study leaders, these 4 guys. And they come coming around, and they're kind of giggling or whatever, and all 4 of them come rushing up the stairs to this porch that I was standing on. And the staff workers just parked right out in the parking lot right here, and they're trying to kidnap me. And I know what's happening. This is a prank. This is a joke. But I was so mad, I just started fighting them. I just started punching these guys, elbows, trying to do a wrestling move or two, just freaking out on this porch. And that one of the guys that came up to abduct me, he's this huge guy. He just bear hugs me, picks me up, and then he just walks down these porch stairs. And then he just really slowly lays down on the ground, and he just holds me. And he's like, bro, calm down. And what happened, they actually thought that I didn't know who they were. Do you see what I'm saying? He thought I was like fighting for my life. He was like, no, dude, it's Cord. Like it's your friends in the car. That's Patrick. Like we're all friends. Like dude, calm down. And I was like, I know who you are. And I just started like trying to kick, like I still had my legs, and I was like trying to kick people. And then eventually the staff worker came out of the car, and he just had my bag. He had my bag and my computer, and he was like, we're so sorry, man. Like, I don't know what happened. And I just took my stuff, and I was like, you guys do whatever you want to do. And I just went inside, and I just went down to my room, and I just sat there. And then eventually I just kind of like gathered myself, and then I came outside, and I was like, so what were we going to do? Well, are we going to do something? And they ended up taking me out on this like 2-day retreat at like a restoration like retreat center. And they were like very traumatized the whole time. I was like trying to have fun. like let's forget what happened. This is good, guys, thanks. I always kind of wondered if that made it into the InterVarsity staff workers newsletter, like, hey, like thanks for supporting our work. Like the leader in our chapter fought us and punched us all. 2 years without a Sabbath, and it took 30 minutes without my computer to trigger literally demonic rage inside of me. And a longing to inflict real harm on people. Because I'd gone 2 years without a Sabbath, and I no longer knew who I was. I no longer knew the disposition of God toward me. I no longer knew what hearing the voice of the Lord really sounded like. I was just a shell of a person in a ministry position, just trying to accomplish what was on my plate. It put me in a total meltdown. I had no sense of who I was. And why would I, when I'd submitted myself to the world's demands without the antidote of the Sabbath? Every disciple needs the rhythms of the Sabbath to let Jesus reshape your identity time and time and time again, to say, I am yours and you are mine, and I've purchased and redeemed you, and your life belongs to me, and I make you clean, and I restore you, and you are mine, and I lead you. Time and time again, we have to be reshaped by him. I was even reminded this week of the rule of life instituted by Mother Teresa to help shape the sustained service of the missionaries of charity in Calcutta. I mean, you imagine the type of work she was doing with the dying and the destitute day in and day out. What would sustain that type of work over a lifetime? And this is part of what does it. She instituted this kind of Sabbath policy for everybody who worked with the missionaries of charity, that the sisters shall spend 1 day in every week, 1 week in every month, 1 month in every year, and 1 year in every 6 years to the mother house, where in contemplation and prayer and theological reflection and penance, together with solitude, she can gather in the spiritual strength which she might have used up in the service of the poor. Mother Teresa needed a day every week to remember her own identity, her own need for Jesus, her own spiritual bankruptcy and poverty, and to be restored by his intimacy. And her life is an example of the power of the Sabbath, the type of transformation that comes out of a life like that is an example of the power of the Sabbath. Worship team, if you guys want to come up, I'm going to finish with just one idea. I'm going to finish with what is the most important line, I think, in the whole 11 verses. And it sounds very simple. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. You are not. Authors are not. Leaders are not. Speakers are not. Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. Reading books about the Sabbath can be extremely frustrating because everyone will tell you what the Sabbath isn't and why you need to Sabbath and what the motivations are, but no one will tell you how to Sabbath. You can scan the pages of Walter Brueggemann or Ched Myers or Dorothy Bass, and no one will tell you how to Sabbath. You know why? Because it's above their pay grade. Jesus should tell you that. Jesus is the only one who has the authority to tell you that. Can I go out to eat, or does participation in commerce and consumption enable workers to be robbed of the Sabbath? That's a great question. Ask Jesus. If I eat at home on Sunday, should I prepare the meal on Saturday in order to be relieved of that type of work on Sunday? That's a great question. Ask Jesus. Does the Sabbath have to be Sunday? What about Saturday? What about Tuesday? What about Friday? Great question. Ask Jesus. Can I play World of Warcraft all day or watch a whole season of Game of Thrones? Great question. Ask Jesus. He'll probably say no. Is it okay if I mow the yard or vacuum or fix my car? Great question. Ask Jesus how best to honor and hear from him with his day. You see, the Sabbath isn't a memoriam for a dead prophet from 2,000 years ago, which is now entrusted to man-made liturgy. But it is a weekly break in the rhythm of life to be with the living, breathing, active, resurrected Jesus who has been given all authority in heaven and on earth, and he can handle your questions. And he leads you in the weekly restoration of your identity and open-handed mercy to the needy he may graciously bring you on that day. He is the shaper of your Sabbath. Stop acting like he can't lead you. The law for the day was given at his command. The worship of the day returns to his honor, and the proper observance of the day is his sovereign prerogative. So as we come to the table today, may we remember that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, and that title was acquired at such a great price and cost to himself. On the night he was betrayed, he took the bread and he broke it, saying, "This is my body, broken for you. Eat it to remember me." And in the same way, he took the cup and he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you, for the forgiveness of sins. Drink it to remember me." And when you drink it and when you eat it, you remember the identity that he has declared over you and the war that he has waged against every element of the world that wants to identify you on your behalf. And you take time every week to be with him, to sit with him, to hear from him, to commit to him, to be under his love, to be under his grace, and to receive the life that was vanquished to purchase you, to pay for you, to redeem you, to renew you, to restore you. So when you're ready, come and receive the body and blood of Jesus given for you.